The name in the lower corner of the folder made Renata stop. She had been moving through the stack quickly, 42 applications for a single overnight maintenance position, most of them thin on experience, thinner on reliability. She had not expected to spend more than an hour on it. Her assistant, Lena, had already flagged 3 for immediate rejection and 2 as conditional mabes. The rest were sorted into a pile that Renata had been working through with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had done this exact task in 15 previous hiring cycles. Then she came to the name. She read it twice, set the folder down, picked it up again. The name was Gideon Hart. She sat with that for a moment. Outside her window, downtown Halifax moved the way it always did on a Tuesday morning, slow and gray and purposeful, the harbor somewhere behind the fog. Renata had lived here for 11 years and still could not see the harbor from her office without feeling like something had been given back to her. She was not a sentimental person. She noted the feeling and filed it away. She read the application from the beginning. Gideon Hart, 51 years old, single, 1 dependent, a daughter, age 14. Current address, an apartment on Roby Street, the kind of building that had been functional in 1987 and had not changed its opinion of itself since. Previous employment, a seasonal landscaping company in Dartmouth, a night shift at a warehouse distribution center that had since closed, 18 months with a private cleaning service covering commercial properties across HRM. No gaps explained, no cover letter. The education section listed a single entry, Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering, Dalhousie University, 1997, and then stopped. Nothing after. No masters, no professional credentials, no continuing education. The line just ended the way a road ends at a shoreline. Renata closed the folder. She sat without moving for nearly a minute, which was unusual for her. People who worked closely with Renata Aldgate said she had 2 modes, moving and thinking. They did not always know which one they were watching. She pressed the intercom. Lena, the Hart application, the overnight maintenance position. Can you pull it from the stack and set up an interview? A pause on the other end. The maintenance position? Do you want HR to handle that or? I'll do it. Another pause. Lena had been with her for 4 years and had learned the shape of the questions she was not supposed to ask. I'll set it for Thursday, Lena said. Gideon Hart arrived at 9:10 on Thursday morning, which was not late. The appointment had been for 9, but the elevator in Renata's building was undergoing maintenance of its own, and the stairs from the lobby to the 8th floor took longer than most people anticipated. He appeared in the doorway of the waiting area without hurry, without apology, and without the expression most people wore when they had just climbed 8 flights and were trying to pretend otherwise. His breathing was level. His jacket was dark gray and clean, the kind of clean that comes from careful attention rather than newness. He carried nothing. He told the receptionist his name and then stood with his hands at his sides and looked at the framed photographs on the far wall the way someone looks at them when they are genuinely interested and not just passing time. Renata watched him from the glass partition of her office for approximately 30 seconds before opening the door. Mr. Hart. He turned. He had the kind of face that became more specific the longer you looked at it. Not remarkable in the first glance, but exact, precise around the eyes, with the particular stillness of a person who had at some point made a decision about how much of themselves to show. Mrs. Aldgate, he said. She had not introduced herself. He had looked her up. That told her something. She showed him into her office and he sat across from her with his jacket still on, which she also noted. You've come about the overnight maintenance position, she said. I have, and you're aware that's what it is, overnight. Maintenance, I read the posting. She looked at him across the desk. The posting had described the role accurately, mopping floors, restocking supplies in the communal areas, light fixture replacement, seasonal upkeep of the building's entry areas. It was honest work. It was not the kind of work the Dalhousie engineering degree on his application suggested he had spent his 20s preparing for. She said, I'd like to ask about the gap. Gideon looked at her without any change in his expression. Between the degree and now? Between the degree and any work that corresponds to it, yes. He was quiet for a moment. Not uncomfortable quiet, the other kind. The kind that belongs to people who have made peace with a question and are deciding how much of the answer is anyone else's business. My wife died, he said, when my daughter was 3 months old. There were some years after that where the work I did was the work that was available. The kind you can do at night, or that doesn't require you to be somewhere at 7 in the morning when you're the only one in the house. He said it the way you say a fact that has long since lost its shock. Not without weight, just without the performance of weight. Renata did not say she was sorry. She believed apologies for things outside your control were a form of noise, and she thought watching him that he might agree. The overnight hours aren't a problem for you, she said. No, your daughter is 14. She stays with my sister 3 nights a week. The nights I would be here. Renata looked down at the application, then back at him. I went to Dal, she said. Class of 2001. Civil, you graduated 4 years ahead of me. I didn't know you. I knew your name. Something shifted in his face. Very small. The adjustment a person makes when they are recalibrating the conversation they thought they were walking into. You published a paper in your 3rd year, she said, on load distribution in prefabricated concrete systems. It was still in the department reading list when I arrived. Professor McLean referenced it in his 2nd semester lectures, annually. Gideon Hart did not say anything. Why this position, she said. Not a question exactly, more like the beginning of one she was leaving for him to complete. He looked at the window. The harbor was visible today, barely, through the gray, and he looked at it for a moment before looking back. My daughter has a school she likes, he said. I'm not moving her out of her school. The night schedule means I'm home before she leaves in the morning. It means I can be there for the things that matter to her. He paused. The work is what it is. I've done harder things for less reason. Renata looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, the position is yours if you want it, but I'd like you to come back in 2 weeks. I want to show you something. He didn't ask what. He just said yes. He started on a Monday. The building that housed Aldgate Infrastructure, Renata's firm, 31 employees, structural consulting for residential and commercial projects across Nova Scotia and into New Brunswick, was a converted warehouse on Lower Water Street. 5 floors of exposed brick and iron and glass that had been badly designed in the 1990s and expensively corrected in the 2010s. The overnight shift ran from 11 to 7. Gideon was given a key card, a storage closet on the 2nd floor, and a binder that outlined the cleaning schedule, the supply inventory process, and the emergency contact protocol. He read the binder that first night in under 20 minutes. He then walked every floor of the building slowly and alone, the way a person walks through a space they are trying to understand. The junior engineer who discovered him doing this at 12:30 in the morning was a 26-year-old named Tobias, who was still at his desk because he had a site report due and had underestimated the time it would take. Tobias was not someone who hid his reactions well. This was something people said about him often enough that he was aware of it and slightly embarrassed by it. He had walked around the corner toward the water cooler and come face to face with a man he didn't recognize examining the load-bearing column at the southeast corner of the 3rd floor with a level of focused attention that did not seem consistent with mopping. Can I help you? Tobias said, and heard how that sounded and added, hi, I'm Tobias. I work upstairs. Gideon, the man said. He looked back at the column. This anchor bracket. On the column, the washer's been replaced, but the bolt hasn't. The threads don't match. He looked at Tobias without urgency. Has anyone flagged that? Tobias looked at the column. He had walked past it every day for 2 years. I'm not sure. I'll mention it. You should mention it to someone who can action it, Gideon said, and resumed what he had been doing. Tobias mentioned it to his supervisor the next morning. His supervisor, a licensed structural engineer named Kerrigan, laughed and said he'd take a look. He took a look that afternoon. He stopped laughing. The bracket was exactly what Gideon had described. The threaded mismatch had been there for at least a year, the product of a rushed repair by a contractor who had used the materials to hand. It wasn't catastrophic, but it was a liability, and under load conditions it was worse than that, and no one in the building had caught it. Kerrigan asked Tobias where the tip had come from. Tobias said the overnight maintenance guy. Kerrigan asked Tobias to say that again. Renata heard about it from Kerrigan on Friday morning. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which was not something she did often. She was known among her employees as someone who knew where a sentence was going before the speaker did, and who was not always patient enough to let them arrive there. When Kerrigan finished, she said, "Did you fix it?" "Already done. I had someone in Thursday afternoon." "Good, thank you." She looked at the window. "Is there anything else?" Kerrigan hesitated. "I just thought it was, who notices something like that? Walking through on a cleaning shift." Renata said, "Someone who knows what they're looking at." She said it simply, with no particular emphasis. Kerrigan left, and she stood at the window for a moment, with her coffee, watching the street below. She thought about the paper. Load distribution in prefabricated concrete systems. It had been dry reading. McLean's courses always featured dry reading, but the argument inside it had been elegant, the kind of elegance that only comes from thinking very hard about a problem for a very long time. She had been 19 when she read it, and she had thought, whoever wrote this sees things that most people don't see. She called Lena. "Move Thursday," she said. "I want to meet with Gideon Hart. Not in the evening, before his shift starts. Daytime." She met him in the boardroom rather than her office. This was a choice. Her office was a place where she had the authority of her things around her. The degrees on the wall, the project photographs, the accumulated weight of her professional history. The boardroom was neutral. She thought it might be easier for him there. She was not certain she was right. He arrived in the same jacket. He sat with the same stillness. She had put 3 things on the table: a preliminary site report for a retaining wall project in Bedford, a set of structural drawings for a proposed residential development in Dartmouth, and a problem she had written out by hand on a piece of notepaper, a load calculation she had been wrestling with for a week, related to a bridge rehabilitation project in Pictou County, the kind of problem that made experienced engineers lose sleep. She pushed the notepaper across to him. "I'm not asking you to do anything," she said. "I just want to see what you make of it." Gideon looked at the paper. He picked up the pen she had left beside it and turned the paper over so the blank side was up and began to write. He did not speak for approximately 4 minutes. She watched him work, not his face, which didn't change, but his hand, which moved with the unhurried assurance of a person's for whom this was as natural as breathing. He turned the paper back around and pushed it toward her. She looked at it for a long moment. It was not the approach her team had been taking. It was cleaner. It addressed a variable they had been treating as a constant, which had been complicating every downstream calculation. The math was right. She checked it in her head without thinking about it, the way you might check a piece of music for a wrong note, and it was right. She looked up at him. "Where did you go?" she said. He looked at her steadily. He understood the question. "I had a daughter to raise," he said, "alone, and no one to leave her with. You couldn't have found work." "I found work," he said. "I found a lot of work." The question was what kind. He paused. "I was offered a position in Calgary when she was 6 months old. Good position. The company was solid. I turned it down because I couldn't take her, and I wasn't leaving her." He paused again. "You make choices. The choices narrow things. That's just the shape of a life." Renata sat with that. "I have a structural analyst role," she said. "Not overnight. 9 to 4, which I understand isn't ideal. But we can discuss flexibility. It's not what someone with your background would have started from 10 years ago. But it's a door." Gideon looked at the notepaper on the table, then at her. "What about the maintenance position?" he said. She blinked. "You'd continue both?" "Until you needed me elsewhere." He said it like it was obvious. "I told you I'd do the work." She looked at him across the boardroom table and understood something she had been almost understanding since Thursday morning. He wasn't here as a stepping stone. He wasn't here to be discovered. He had applied for the maintenance position because he needed the income and the hours suited his life. And he had taken it seriously because that was simply how he took things. The bracket on the column had not been a strategy. It had been a reflex. "I'll sort out the overlap with HR," she said. He nodded once. Then the Bedford site report. On the table. She looked at it. "What about it?" "I drove past that site on my way in this morning. The soil conditions along the north face. I looked at the preliminary report when I came in early. There's something in the drainage assessment that doesn't account for the spring thaw load." She stared at him. "The Bedford project's been in review for 3 months, she said. "I know. The date's on the report." She pulled the Bedford folder toward her. The Bedford issue took 11 days to resolve. It involved 2 site visits, a revised drainage study, and a conversation with a client that Renata had not been looking forward to. The revised plan was stronger, the client was frustrated, and then, slowly, relieved. The project moved forward on solid ground, in the most literal sense. Gideon caught the problem. Kerrigan and the rest of the structural team did the revision. This was the appropriate order of things, and no one on the team was confused about it. But Tobias, who had not fully recovered from the column incident, began leaving his late-night site reports on a corner of the second-floor common table rather than in his supervisor's inbox, on the vague theory that if Gideon was going to walk past them anyway, it couldn't hurt. He was not sure this made logical sense. He kept doing it. The first time, Gideon left a note beside one of the reports, a small, handwritten observation about a load assumption in a proposed residential foundation, flagged with a question mark rather than a correction. As though he were offering rather than insisting, Tobias carried it to Kerrigan without quite knowing what to say. Kerrigan read it, set it down, read it again. "Where did this come from?" he said. "The maintenance guy," said Tobias. This time, Kerrigan did not ask him to repeat it. The notes continued. They were infrequent, once every week or two, never more. They were never about anything other than the work, and they were never presented as anything other than a question. There was no edge in them, no performance of expertise, no sense that Gideon was tracking whether anyone followed up. Kerrigan, who was a methodical person with a professional discomfort around things he couldn't categorize, asked Renata what exactly they were supposed to do with a maintenance employee who kept leaving structurally sound engineering annotations on the overnight team's paperwork. Renata said, "Follow up on the questions." Kerrigan said, "And the employee?" Renata said, "He's also in the analyst role now. We sorted it with HR." Kerrigan absorbed this. "So he's both, until the transition is complete. That's not how any of this is supposed to work." "No," Renata agreed. "It isn't." The Pict County Bridge project was Gideon's first formal assignment under the analyst title. He received it on a Wednesday afternoon in a handoff meeting attended by himself, Kerrigan, and a project coordinator named Isabel, who had the particular organizational precision of someone who had survived multiple engineering firms and had no patience left for ambiguity. Isabel had prepared a briefing document. She walked them through it with the brisk efficiency of a person who had better things to do with the afternoon and was committed to getting there. When she finished, she looked at Gideon the way she looked at all new hires. Professionally skeptical, minimally invested, willing to be persuaded. "Questions?" she said. Gideon had 3. They were the kind of questions that turned out to be more efficient than they appeared at first, each one uncovering something that would have cost the project time later if it had gone unasked. Isabel answered them. By the third answer, she was writing things down in her own notebook, which was something she did not usually do in briefing meetings. She and Kerrigan rode the elevator back up together afterward. "Well," Kerrigan said. "Yes," Isabel said. They stood in companionable silence for 2 floors. "Does he know," Kerrigan said, "that the Pictou Bridge is the most complicated rehabilitation project this firm has taken on in the last 5 years?" Isabel said. "He's read the file. He knew before we sat down." "How do you know?" "Because his first question was the only question that could have been his first question if he'd read the whole file." She looked at her notebook. He'd already started working the problem. The moment that people at the firm would talk about afterward, quietly. The way you talk about things that seem slightly impossible in the rear view. Happened 6 weeks after Gideon joined the analytical team. The project was a proposed pedestrian overpass for a new development in the Woodside area of Dartmouth. It had been assigned to a junior team as a manageable project, the kind of thing a developing firm gives its newer engineers to build confidence. The lead on the design was a third-year civil engineer named Paola, who was methodical and careful and had spent a lot of time on this particular design and was, in the way of careful people who have spent a lot of time on something, reluctant to revisit it. The team had presented in the main boardroom. There were 8 people in the room. The presentation ran 40 minutes. The structural drawings were up on the screen when the issue surfaced, not from Renata, not from Kerrigan, but from Gideon, who had been sitting against the back wall with a paper copy of the drawings and had said nothing until the moment the presenter opened the floor to questions. He raised his hand. "The deck profile," he said. "The camber." Paola looked at the screen. "What about it? It doesn't account for the freeze-thaw variance in this microclimate. This section of the harbor, The temperature differential is measurable. The camber as drawn will induce a stress cycle the material can't absorb over a 20-year lifespan without cracking. There was a silence in the room. Paola looked at the drawing, then at Gideon. That's not something we've seen flagged in any of the reference data. The reference data is from a general Nova Scotia climate data set, Gideon said. Woodside runs cold off the water. It's localized. You'd need the microclimate station data from the Bedford Basin Monitoring Program. It's publicly available. Another silence. Paola pulled up her laptop. The monitoring data took 40 seconds to load. She found what Gideon was describing in roughly another 2 minutes. She sat looking at it with the expression of someone who has just located something they were hoping not to find. The camber needs to be revised, said Kerrigan from across the table. Yes, said Paula, quietly, with the grace of someone who understood that the finding was more important than the finding out who. No one in the room said anything about the fact that the person who had raised it was a structural analyst who had 5 weeks earlier been working an overnight cleaning shift in this building. That absence of comment was, in its own way, a comment. Gideon looked at the drawings on the screen for another moment, then looked back at his paper copy and made a small notation in the margin. He did not look around the room to see how anyone had taken what he'd said. After the meeting broke up, Tobias lingered near the door. How did you know about the Bedford Basin Monitoring Program, he said. Gideon looked at him. I grew up in Dartmouth, he said. On the water. He picked up his copy of the drawings and left. Renata offered him the senior analyst position in November. She did it in the boardroom again, which he appreciated without saying so. She put a contract on the table with the title on the first page, and the salary on the second and the benefits on the third, and she let him read it without narrating it. He read it the way he read everything. Once, completely, without rushing. When he was done, he set it on the table and looked out the window. The harbor was gray today, the way it often was in November, and the light was the particular flat white of a maritime winter coming in. My daughter has a recital next Thursday, he said. I heard, Renata said. Lena mentioned you'd asked about adjusting the schedule that week. Piano, he said. She's been playing for 6 years. He paused. She's good. The schedule can flex, Renata said. That's not in the contract, but I'm telling you anyway. He looked at the contract again. At the first page where the title was. When do you need an answer, he said. I'd like one before the end of the month. He nodded. He stood and picked up the folder and tucked it under his arm. At the door he stopped. The beams on the second floor, he said. I noticed something in my last few shifts. North side. There's a deflection pattern that's worth someone looking at before spring. Renata looked at him. Write it up. He said he would. He said yes to the contract 2 days later over email, with no additional remarks. He returned the signed copy via Lena. He showed up for his first day in the new role the following Monday, in the same jacket, at exactly 9 o'clock. He brought in nothing for his desk except a framed photograph, which Tobias, who was constitutionally unable to leave things alone, eventually managed to see. A teenage girl at a piano, caught in the moment just before she started to play, her hands in her lap, her eyes on the sheet music, completely still. The frame was plain wood, worn at the corners, the kind that had been sitting somewhere specific for years, and had no intentions of going anywhere. Tobias looked at it for a moment. Then he went back to his desk. He left his site report on the corner of the table on his way out that evening, the way he always did. He had stopped thinking of it as an odd thing to do. It had become simply part of how the work moved through the building, found, considered, handed forward. Some things, without anyone deciding they would, just became the way things were done.